then we have oxygen, so now we can go give that oxygen to the rest of the body. The lungs have their own arteries, the bronchial arteries coming out of the aorta, and that's going to supply just the lungs. Just like the heart, the cardiac arteries and veins supply just the heart, and then we have the vessels up on top that took things in and out of it. So the pulmonary arteries have, or the lungs have the bronchial arteries, which supply just the lungs. To move stuff in and out of the lungs, we go through the pulmonary arteries and veins. So just like the heart, we have a road in and out, that's through the pulmonary trunk, but what supplies the heart are the cardiac veins, and the pulmonary arteries are the route for exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide, but what gives them their blood supply and nutrients are the bronchial arteries. Same situation. Then if we look inside the heart or inside the lungs, we have lungs on either side. We have our trachea coming down. Remember, it splits into our right and left primary bronchi. And then we're going to branch off of that. Those are going to be our secondary bronchi. And then the little branches off of that are our tertiary bronchi. So we're getting further and further and further out. The further away we get from the trachea, that is all cartilage. The further we get away, it's less cartilage, and it goes towards more smooth muscle. And then once we get out here into the lungs, that's where we have all those alveoli lying out there, and that's where gas exchanges. So oxygen leaves the lungs across that capillary bed, goes out into the blood vessels, and gets delivered everywhere. Carbon dioxide is the byproduct of breathing. It's already out in the blood, so it leaves the blood, crosses it, comes into the lungs, and we breathe it up and out and get rid of it. So we're transporting. That's where gas exchange occurs, is once we get way out here in these far parts. It doesn't occur in the trachea or in the bronchi or anywhere else. You have to get out into those terminal bronchioles before we start getting gas exchange. So then, just like everything, we have the linings that go around it. Remember, if it covers it, it's called the visceral, and if it lines the cavity, it's called the parietal. So it's the pleura, or the serosal membranes, is the covering that's around the organs, and it's going to line the chest cavity to make a barrier, and that's called the visceral pleura. And if it's actually touching the lungs, it's called the parietal pleura. I'm sorry, visceral if it's covering, actually touching the lungs, parietal if it's covering the cavity. So we have those layers just to isolate it, just like we have with the muscles, just like we have with the nerves, just like we have with the heart. We always are going to have those membranes that cover it. We call them serosal membranes, and the word for them are the pleura. Which pleura? Visceral, if it's covering the lungs, so that would be the pulmonary. And if it's covering the cavity, then it's going to be the parietal. So in between those, though, we have a little space. We have a little cavity in there, a pleural cavity. And that's so that the lungs, just like the heart, can expand and contract. The heart's going to beat and beat and beat, so we have to have a little space in between there. And the lungs are going to expand and contract, expand and contract. So we have that pleural space in there. How we're going to be able to expand and contract those lungs is through pressure. So remember, no movement happens if we don't have pressure. We talked about that in the vessels chapter. We can't have any flow if we don't have a difference in pressure. Same thing with our lungs. No movement if there's no difference in pressure. So we have pressure inside the lung. That's called intra, to be inside of. What are we inside of? The lung. Intrapulmonary pressure. That pressure inside the lungs is 760 millimeters of mercury. So we have a pressure in the lungs pushing out. That's intrapulmonary pressure. Intrapleural pressure is out here in that cavity, and it's pushing in. So inside the lungs, intrapulmonary is pushing out at 760 millimeters, and intrapleural is in the cavity pushing in. So always pushing out, and there's an equal and opposite force pushing back in. Otherwise, the lungs will just keep going out, or if they don't have that resistance, that outside force could collapse the lung. So we're always trying to balance out that inside and outside pressure. But it's a little bit negative. It's minus 4 millimeters, so it's 756 millimeters pushing in, 760 pushing back out so we can expand. 756 pushes in, 760 pushes out. So that's what our lung movement is, back and forth like that. It's all about the pressures inside, intrapulmonary, or in the cavity, intrapleural pressure. And that's a little less than 760. Atmospheric pressure is pressure all around us, pushing in on us all the time. So we have to deal with that as well. We have pressure in the lung, we have pressure in the cavity, and then we just have air, outside pressure pushing in on us all the time. So we have to have these differences in pressure to allow the lungs to expand and collapse. If we don't, the lungs are going to collapse when that intrapleural pressure pushes in, or the lungs are going to blow out when that intrapulmonary pushes out. So they have to balance each other out. So we have to have the pressures. What are some things that we see when things get out of whack? We have pleurisy and pleural effusion. Has anybody ever had pleurisy? It's very, very painful. So what it is it's inflammation of this lining around here. It gets inflamed. So pleurisy, inflammation of the pleura, the pleural linings, and it can lead to pneumonia, and it causes friction, and it rubs. So it's like sandpaper rubbing in there. Every time you breathe in, every time you breathe out. And it's just back and forth friction. It's really, really painful. Because we have to breathe, and every time you do, it rubs on that. And then you breathe out, you're like relief. Then you breathe in again, and it hurts. So you get that inflammation in there. And when you get that, it can lead to pneumonia, which then can lead to pleural effusion. And that's an accumulation of fluid in that pleural cavity. So in this space where the lungs live, we get an accumulation of fluid in there. And that's never a good situation. What might be in there? It might be blood. So if there's some kind of trauma, it could be blood in there. Fluid back up from the left side heart failure. We're not pushing. Remember, from the left side, we go to the ventricle and we push up and out the aorta. If that left side is not working, it backs up into the lungs, and that left side heart can't push it out. It just kind of regurgitates back, and it accumulates in the lungs. So that's pleural effusion. Not a good situation. So those are things that can go wrong in that space there, in that pleural space. So how do you treat that? Well, it's inflammation. So you're going to put them on a steroid to get the inflammation down. Or if you get infection in there, then they're going to get on an antibiotic to get rid of that. And then if it's an effusion, you got to drain it out. You got to get that fluid out of it. So messing around with the lungs is not a good idea. So there's our three pressures we talked about. Atmospheric pressure outside, always pushing in on us. Intrapulmonary, inside the lung, so it's actually that pressure in the alveoli. And then intrapleural, that's the pressure in the cavity. And we have to keep those balanced out so we don't have lungs collapsing or we don't have lungs exploding. So the negative pressure is the intrapleural, that was 756. And positive pressure is greater than atmospheric pressure. So we have to balance out that positive and negative pressure. And we do, we have normal breathing and everything's in homeostasis. So atmospheric pressure is that pressure around us always pushing in. So we got to push back out with our intrapulmonary pressure. And then the intrapleural pressure has to be in part of that equation as well. Intrapulmonary pressure recorded inside the alveoli changes with inspiration and expiration, go back and forth. So we inspire and expire, and we're always attempting to push out on atmospheric pressure that's pushing in. So we have to maintain that outward pressure, or atmospheric pressure is going to be. Then we have our intrapleural space. That's the space back here, this little white space between the visceral and the parietal, between the lining of the lung, between the lining of the cavity. So intrapleural is outside the lung itself, also affected by changes of inspiration and expiration, but it's always negative, so it's a little less than atmospheric pressure, and then that's the one pushing in, so we can expand back out. So push in, inspiration, expand back out, expiration. So always monitoring those changes in pressure in the lungs. Questions over that? Does that make sense? So we have to have difference in pressure? Because without pressure, we don't have flow. Without changes in pressure, we don't have flow. In the vessels, we were talking about blood. We have to have different pressure so we can keep our different changes in pressure from the aorta, highest pressure, out to the further ones, lower pressure, and then the veins, no pressure. If we don't have a change in pressure, we don't have a change in flow. The flow we're talking about there is blood. And the lungs, the flow we're talking about, is the same thing. If we don't have a change in pressure, we don't have a change in flow. And the flow we're talking about is air. So it doesn't matter what we're pushing, we just have to have changes in pressure to allow for that difference. Otherwise, it's static, it just stays there. Think about if something blocks your airway, nothing can get through and there's no flow, right? So we have to have those differences. All right. So what creates the negative intrapleural pressure? Well, look back here at our lungs. We've got this big muscle here, that's the diaphragm. That's one of our primary breathing muscles, so that's going to be involved in it. Surface tension, we talked about that. Remember, hydrogen bonds like to go out and get a hold of everybody, and so it creates that network of surface tension. And when we're breathing, we're getting condensation, just like our glasses at this time of year where there's differences out there. So we have surface tension because there's water in the lungs, and surface tension is always wanting to pull things in. And surfactant says, no, you can't do that. So it makes it slippery so those hydrogen bonds can't collapse those little alveoli. So what creates a negative pressure is one force pulls on the rib cage out. That's our elastic muscles, our external intercostals are pulling out, and our diaphragm is helping move up and down. So we have the muscles, and then we have surface tension. When we're breathing, we have water collecting in those alveoli, and surface tension wants to tighten those little alveoli, wants to close them right up. But surfactant says, no, you can't do that, makes it slippery so they can't get a hold of each other. And then that elastic fibers allow the alveoli to expand back out again. So they're still going to want to do this little thing of surface tension wants to close those little grape clusters in there, wants to close those, wants to pull it together. And surfactant says, no, we're going to keep it slippery so you can't get a hold of it. So even though they're trying, surfactant lines it, and then it's like this inside. So they clamp shut, they can't quite get a hold of it. And the elastic fibers then can expand it back out. So it's just like a balloon. When you first blow up that balloon, it's really hard, it's stuck together, surface tension. And then you start blowing up, water condenses in there, makes it a little slipperier, and then you can expand. But it's that elasticity of the balloon that allows it to go back, but it allows it to expand. So alveoli are like balloons. They expand and they contract. As long as that coating is inside there, they're not going to stick together, and you can blow it up. Every time after that, it gets a little easier and a little easier to blow up. So alveoli are just like that. That's what's creating those negative pressures. Something's always going to want to collapse it. Surfactant and elastic fibers and the muscles say no. We're going to allow that to balance back out again. So other conditions that happen with lungs. Atelectasis, big fancy word for a collapsed lung. Atelectasis. A collapsed lung due to whatever. We're always trying to keep those lungs open, and it's those difference in pressures that allow that to happen. But sometimes the lungs collapse, and it's due to blocked bronchial or a rupture in there, and we interfere with that pressure, and then the lungs snap shut. We don't have that opposite pressure pushing back out, and they come closed. So whatever might close, whatever might block that bronchial, maybe you're choking on something, maybe it's mucus, maybe it's airway constriction, whatever might be causing that blockage can cause the lungs to collapse because we can't get that pressure back in there to blow those lungs back up. Or if you get punctured, then obviously atmospheric pressure wins. It's coming in with all kinds of force, and the lungs can't push back because it's not a sealed container anymore, so its pressure gets collapsed in on itself.
You mean like if somebody were to get stabbed?
Right, stabbed, or like if you're in a car and something pokes you, fall on something, whatever might puncture, whatever might cause, you break a rib and it punctures a lung, whatever it might be, for some reason it gets punctured. So then you can't breathe because now here's your lung. It's like this, you don't have this anymore because the pressure has slammed that shut, so you can't breathe. So you gotta get that airway open back up again. A pneumothorax, so now we punctured the lung and now air is flowing into it. Pneumo is the air or lung, and thorax, the thoracic cavity. So if we puncture that area, the thoracic cavity, then air can get into that cavity and it's pushing in and collapsing that lung again. So a collapsed lung is going to allow that air to suck in. It's a side effect from atelectasis. And then you have to draw that air out. So this is what we always see on the emergency shows. We're like, oh, you can't breathe, they have a collapsed lung. So they go in between the ribs and they put that giant needle in and a big syringe and they suck it back out. And then you've created that vacuum again so the lung expands and your pressure is going up. So once we lose those steel barriers, everything's pressurized. Once we lose that, that lung comes right in. And atmospheric pressure is pushing in, and interpulmonary pressure is pushing in, and the only way we can get that balance is to suck it back out. So atelectasis and pneumothorax put together. Anybody ever experienced that? Has anybody ever gotten to rescue somebody from that? And we have some first responders. Okay, so that's lung anatomy, pressures, conditions. Questions over any of that part of it? Okay. Second part, we're moving into the physiology part of it. So we're going to talk about what happens when we're breathing, and we call that respiration. 4 processes of respiration. Pulmonary ventilation is the word for breathing in and breathing out. So pulmonary ventilation is we're inspiring and expiring. So we have to do that. We've got to get the lungs moving. Once we get the lungs moving, then the primary goal is to have gas exchange down in the lungs on those tertiary bronchioles. So we're going to have gas exchange. Carbon dioxide is going to leave the blood, come into the lungs, and then it's going to go up and out the bronchi and out our trachea and out. Oxygen is going to leave the lungs, go into the blood, and go to all the tissues. We learned about that in the heart. So how are we going to transport those? What we were just talking about, how do we get across that membrane? And then who controls respiration? Where is that coming from? So those are the 4 things we're going to talk about with how do we actually breathe. So here we are, more physics. Call this Boyle's Law. And Boyle's Law is pressure is inversely related to volume. So just like we were talking about, flow is pressure over resistance. The flow in this chapter is oxygen, or gases, I should say. So pressure is the force exerted on the walls of a container, pushing in all the time, or pushing in on whatever we're containing, whether it be a soda can or your lungs, whatever it might be. So the law says as the volume of the container increases, our lungs, breathe in, as the volume increases, the pressure does the opposite, it decreases. So it's an inverse relationship. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Breathe in, volumes increase, we've got a lot of space in there, so there's not much pressure because there's lots of room for the gas to be bouncing around in there. So as volume increases, pressure decreases. And then we breathe out, what do you think happens to pressure? As volume decreases, pressure goes up. Because look how much space we have now. So we have that same gas, but we've compressed it. So pressure is really high now. Now we're pressurized, and it's like our pop can. We put stuff in there, we put carbon dioxide in there, it's pressurized, and then we release the top, it comes out. So Boyle's Law is an inverse relationship. As pressure, as volume increases, pressure decreases. As volume decreases, pressure increases. So we're talking about our lungs. We're inspiring, there's a bunch of space, so there's a little pressure on inspiration. Then we expire, a little bit of space, a lot of pressure. And that's how the lungs work. We have pressurized lungs in there, and we're always going up and down. Volumes increase, volumes decrease. Whatever the volume does, pressure does the opposite. So as volumes change, pressure changes. As the pressure changes, the gas flow is going to change. That makes sense. That's how we move the gases, is by this change in pressure. And then we're going to equalize. That's always the end goal. And pulmonary ventilation, remember ventilation is inspiration and expiration. The lungs expand and compress, expand and compress. So inspiration, expand, expiration, compress. Always expanding and compressing. As the volumes change, so does that pressure, that intrapulmonary pressure. And so how do we get this action in ventilation? How do we get inspiration and how do we get expiration? What is allowing for that to happen? And that's our pulmonary ventilation muscles. So when we're breathing in and out, that's a function of the diaphragm. The diaphragm is our primary breathing muscle. We just kind of think of it as the separation between the chest cavity and the thoracic cavity, but it's the major mover for air. It's our major breathing muscle. So what happens? Inspiration happens, diaphragm contracts, and it goes down. So it's what's pulling that cavity down. When we contract it, it comes down. And then we have the intercostal muscles, the muscles in between our ribs, costal is rib. And the intercostal muscles go sideways. They go up and out when they come back in. So diaphragm increases volume up and down. Intercostals increase outward. And then we expire, they relax, intercostals relax, and diaphragm comes back up. So we have two directions. We have our up and down direction, and we have our side to side direction. Up and down is the diaphragm, increasing the space of inspiration, and outward are the intercostals, increasing the space on inspiration. But we can't stay in that state forever, and then we decrease, we expire, and intercostals relax, and the diaphragm comes back up. And then we just keep repeating that all the time, all the time, all the time. So we have the rising and falling of our chest. What that action is the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. The scalenes also, remember when we were looking at the muscles in lab, we had the intercostals and the scalenes were kind of like right up here. So they're helping also pull the lungs out and compress them back in. So it's diaphragm, intercostals, the scalenes help with that as well. When we contract, that's inspiration, diaphragm moves down, intercostals move out. We expire, we relax, intercostals come in, diaphragm comes up. So that's what's allowing for that expansion and contraction of our chest, our muscles.
So someone that's maybe on a ventilator, are they losing muscle, like their muscles for doing that on their own?
Right, so when they have to be on a ventilator, why is that happening? So it could be a muscle thing when we get into like ALS and muscular dystrophy, all our muscle things where the muscles start to atrophy and they don't work anymore. Or it's coming from the brain where the medulla and the pons are not sending the message. So like if somebody goes into a coma, the muscles are not working, so we ventilate them so that their body, so that the machines do that action. But it's the medulla and pons that send that message of inspire and expire. So if there's some kind of brain trauma, or they're in a coma or something, that message is not getting sent. So it's either a brain thing or a muscle thing. If the brain's working fine, like when we get into the muscular dystrophies and ALS and all that, then it's a muscle thing. So the brain's fine, but the muscles aren't. Or if it's a coma, the muscles are fine, but the brain's not sending a message. So it can be either area. Pressure. Pulmonary ventilation. Expiration is a passive process, so the muscles relax, diaphragm goes back up, intercostals come back in. So lung volumes and pressures, so as the lung volume falls, space gets smaller, pressure gets bigger. We have a lot of pressure in there. So whatever the size of the container is, that's the opposite for pressure. And expiration, we can force out air, and forced expiration, that's when we're contracting our abs. So if you're blowing out, normal ventilation is a relaxed process, but if you're blowing out air, you can feel your abs contract when you're doing that. So the abs can get involved with it if we need them to. And this is what happens when we get into, this is a normal, quiet, passive process, it's inspiration and expiration. We don't really see it. If somebody's sleeping, sometimes, you'll check the baby or somebody's laying next to you and you're watching for their chest to rise and fall. So we don't really notice it. It's a pretty passive process. It's very active with muscles contracting, but you don't see labored breathing. And when we get into airway constriction, like in asthma, then we get into a whole different level of movement, and we don't see, the shoulders aren't still. We start to see this kind of thing. The the shoulders start moving. And you see this right here start to come up. When you start to see that right there, then you know they're in respiratory distress. So the diaphragm's not working right, the intercostals aren't working right, or they're not working enough. And then you start getting this kind of breathing, and that's called secondary breathing, and they're in respiratory distress. So as soon as you can see the shoulders coming up, then you know, oh, something's going on here. Now that's a normal thing. If we're running or we're hurrying or we're exercising, then we're, oh, you're trying to get your breath and you see that. That's okay because you're doing something to be in that situation. And that's supply and demand. You're using your muscles. They need more oxygen. So the body's helping you move everything. So if there's a reason to be like that, that's perfectly fine. If that doesn't calm down, so your asthmatic is running up and down the basketball court, and everybody's running up and down the basketball court, and they're all breathing like this, and then they're like, phew, oh, yeah. All right, I'm good. And they're back to normal. And your asthmatic is still over there going like this. Or they're like this. This is the tripod sign when you lean over like that, or they're like this, and they're trying to get their breath. So anytime they're leaning down, you'll see this happen a lot of times. They're trying to get their breath back again because they're doing this and they're wearing themselves out. So if everybody else looks like they're doing okay, and that one person, unless they like really, really exerted themselves, and they should be looking like that. If everybody else is recovered and this person's still out there and they're kind of off to the side, and they're kind of trying not to get noticed, you're like, what's going on with you? Or they're just, you know, up and down the field, and they're really struggling to breathe. So that's what you're watching for. So being a team doctor for whatever sport my kids were playing at the time, I always got to be on the side, and you start to learn the kids, and you're watching them. And so you know, and back in the day, nobody had inhalers. Now, like everybody shows up with their baggie and their inhaler. And they're like, okay, so you know who needs this. So when we were playing lacrosse, he was our star lacrosse player. And lacrosse is like soccer. You have forwards, you have attacks, and you have defenders, and then you have middies who run the whole length of the field. So he was our middie. He was like the best player in the whole state of Ohio. In the last 10 years, nobody had scored better than this kid. It was just awesome to watch this kid play. And it'd be like watching, you know, Michael Jordan play basketball. This kid just had the talent. And nobody could stop him, and he could just do crazy mad things on the field, cocky as could be, because he was so good. But he would just run up and down, and he was about my size, and just, you know, a little powerhouse.